They whipped her in front of the church until a silent cowboy held her without words. In the dusty town of Dust Devil Gulch, the church bell rang not for prayer, but for punishment. Today, a woman named Elara was being dragged across the dirt square, her hands tied behind her back. The whole town watched in silence as she was forced toward the wooden post where so many had suffered before. But none of them knew that a quiet stranger would soon change everything in ways they never expected. Elara had lived in Dust Devil Gulch her whole life. She was known as the town healer, someone who could cure sick children with her herbal remedies and help mothers through difficult births. Her small cabin at the edge of town was filled with dried plants, healing teas, and medicines made from roots and flowers. For years, people came to her when doctors were too far away or too expensive. She never asked for much in return, just enough food or coins to keep living. But everything changed when Reverend Thorne arrived 6 months ago. This new preacher was different from the old one who had served the town for decades. Thorne was young, loud, and full of fire and brimstone. He preached about sin and punishment every Sunday, his voice echoing off the church walls like thunder. His sermons grew longer and angrier each week. The Reverend saw how much the people respected Elara, and it bothered him. He wanted complete control over every soul in Dust Devil Gulch. So he began planting seeds of doubt about her work. During his sermons, he would talk about the dangers of witchcraft and the evil of those who use dark magic. He never said her name directly, but everyone knew who he meant. Fear began to spread through the town like wildfire. People who had once smiled at Elara now looked away when she walked down the main street. Mothers who had brought their sick babies to her door now crossed to the other side of the road. The fear grew stronger each week as Reverend Thorne's words took hold of their hearts. Then came the day when little Tommy Miller fell sick with a high fever. His mother, desperate and scared, went to Reverend Thorne first, begging him to pray for her son. The preacher prayed loudly and dramatically, but the boy only got worse. In secret, late at night, Mrs. Miller crept to Elara's cabin. She begged the healer to save her child, promising to tell no one. Elara mixed her herbs and stayed up all night caring for Tommy. By morning, his fever had broken, and he was sitting up asking for food. Mrs. Miller cried with relief and thanked Elara over and over. But fear made her keep her promise of silence. 3 days later, Reverend Thorne declared that his prayers alone had saved the boy. He used this as proof of his holy power and claimed that anyone who disagreed was working with the devil. The townspeople, already frightened, believed him completely. That same week, a mysterious stranger rode into town. His name was Jedediah, though few people knew it because he barely spoke to anyone. He was tall and lean, with weathered hands and quiet eyes that seemed to see everything. He kept his hat pulled low and his words to himself. Jedediah rented a small room above the general store and spent his days sitting in the shade, watching the town go about its business. Most folks were curious about this silent cowboy, but he never gave them much to talk about. He would tip his hat politely to the ladies and nod respectfully to the men, but he never started conversations. Some people found his silence unsettling, but there was something calm and steady about him that made others feel safe. Reverend Thorne noticed Jedediah right away. The preacher was used to having every person in town hang on his every word, but this stranger seemed completely uninterested in his sermons. Jedediah would sometimes sit on the church steps during services, listening from outside, but he never came in to worship. This bothered the Reverend more than he cared to admit. As days passed, Reverend Thorne's speeches became even more extreme. He talked constantly about cleansing the town of evil influences. His followers, scared and desperate to prove their faith, began reporting their neighbors for the smallest things. Someone who grew unusual plants might be suspected of witchcraft. A woman who was too good at predicting weather could be called a fortune teller. The tension in Dust Devil Gulch grew thick as summer heat. People stopped trusting each other. Friends turned against friends. Families split apart over suspicions and accusations. The joy and community spirit that had once made the town special was dying a slow, painful death. Then came the morning when Reverend Thorne made his boldest move yet. He stood on the church steps with 3 of his most loyal followers and pointed directly at Elara's cabin. His voice boomed across the town square as he declared her a witch who had been poisoning the minds and bodies of good Christian people. He demanded that she be brought to justice immediately. A crowd gathered quickly, some eager to prove their loyalty to the preacher, others too afraid to stay away. They marched to Elara's home like an angry mob, their footsteps raising clouds of dust in the morning air. They found her tending to her garden, peacefully watering her healing plants. Elara didn't run or fight when they came for her. She looked at these people she had helped for so many years, seeing the fear and shame in their eyes. She knew that most of them didn't really believe she was evil, but they were too scared of Reverend Thorn to stand up for her. So she let them tie her hands and lead her to the town square without saying a word. By noon, the entire population of Dust Devil Gulch had gathered around the wooden whipping post. Children peeked out from behind their mothers' skirts. Men shuffled their feet and avoided eye contact. Everyone knew this was wrong, but no one had the courage to speak up. Reverend Thorn climbed onto a wooden crate so everyone could see him clearly. His face was red with excitement as he began his speech about ridding the town of evil. He waved his arms dramatically and quoted Bible verses about punishment and justice. The crowd listened in uncomfortable silence, their hearts heavy with guilt. From his usual spot in the shade of the blacksmith's shop, Jedediah watched everything unfold. His face showed no emotion, but his eyes were sharp and alert. He saw how the townspeople shifted nervously, how some of them wiped away secret tears, how even Reverend Thorn's strongest supporters looked uncomfortable with what was about to happen. Elara was tied to the post with her back to the crowd. She stood straight and tall, refusing to beg for mercy or proclaim her innocence. She had lived her life helping others, and she would face this punishment with the same quiet dignity that had guided all her actions. Reverend Thorn picked up the leather whip himself, wanting to personally deliver what he called divine justice. He raised it high above his head, and the crowd held its breath. The first strike came down hard across Elara's back, and she gasped but didn't cry out. The sound of leather hitting flesh echoed across the silent square. Several people in the crowd turned away, unable to watch. Some women covered their children's eyes. A few men took steps backward, their faces pale with horror. But no one spoke up. No one moved to stop what was happening. The second lash fell, and then the third. Elara's legs began to shake, but she remained upright. Blood began to seep through her torn dress, staining the fabric dark red. The sight made some people in the crowd feel sick, but still, no one found the courage to intervene. Reverend Thorn was enjoying himself. He could see the fear in every face around him, and it made him feel powerful and important. This public punishment would cement his control over Dust Devil Gulch forever. No one would dare question his authority after this display. As he raised the whip for the fourth time, something unexpected happened. A calm, steady voice cut through the silence like a knife through butter. It wasn't loud or angry, just firm and clear. "That's enough." Every head turned to see Jedediah walking slowly toward the whipping post. He didn't hurry or run. He just moved with the same quiet confidence he had shown since arriving in town. His boots made soft sounds in the dirt as he approached, and his spurs jingled gently with each step. Reverend Thorn was so surprised that he froze with the whip still raised above his head. He had expected many things, but not interference from the silent stranger who had shown no interest in the town's affairs. "This is none of your concern, Cowboy," Thorn said, his voice shaking slightly. "This woman is a witch, and she must be punished according to God's law." Jedediah didn't answer with words. Instead, he simply reached out and caught the whip in his bare hand, just as Reverend Thorn brought it down. The leather wrapped around his palm, and he held it there for a moment, his steady gaze meeting the preacher's frightened eyes. Then, without saying another word, Jedediah pulled the whip from Thorn's grasp and dropped it in the dirt. He walked over to Elara and used his knife to cut the ropes that bound her to the post. She stumbled slightly as she was freed, and he caught her gently, helping her stand steady on her feet. The crowd watched in shocked silence as Jedediah stood beside Elara, one arm supporting her, while she regained her strength. He didn't make speeches or threats. He simply positioned himself between her and anyone who might try to hurt her, his presence as solid and unmovable as a mountain. Reverend Thorn's face turned purple with rage. How dare this stranger interfere with his divine work? He signaled to his 3 followers, ordering them to seize Jedediah and tie him up beside the woman. They hesitated for a moment, something about the cowboy's calm confidence making them nervous. But before anyone could move, Elara found her voice. Supported by Jedediah's quiet strength, she stood as tall as she could and spoke directly to the crowd that had gathered to watch her suffer. "Reverend Thorne," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the square, "tell these good people about your son's illness last winter." The preacher's face went white as a sheet. "I don't know what you mean," he stammered, but everyone could see the panic in his eyes. "Tell them how you came to my door in the middle of the night," Elara continued, growing stronger with each word. "Tell them how you begged me to use my herbs to save little Samuel when your prayers didn't work. Tell them how you called my work a miracle when it saved your boy's life." The crowd began to murmur among themselves. They remembered Reverend Thorne's sick son and how the boy had recovered so quickly. They had all assumed it was because of the preacher's prayers, just as he had claimed. "Tell them how you promised to protect me from anyone who called me a witch," Elara said, her voice growing stronger. "Tell them how you said my healing gift was a blessing from God himself." Reverend Thorne tried to deny it, but the truth was written all over his face. His carefully constructed image began to crumble like a house of cards in a strong wind. The people he had terrified with his talk of witchcraft and devil worship began to see him for what he really was, a hypocrite who used their fears to control them. One by one, the townspeople began to step forward. Mrs. Miller spoke up about how she had also gone to Elara in secret. Others shared similar stories. The baker's wife told how Elara had cured her husband's bad back. The school teacher explained how the healer had saved her daughter from a terrible cough. As the truth came out, the crowd's fear turned to anger. They had been manipulated and lied to by a man who claimed to speak for God. They had nearly let an innocent woman be beaten to death because of his lies and their own cowardice. Reverend Thorne saw which way the wind was blowing. His support was crumbling as fast as his lies were being exposed. Without another word, he turned and ran toward his horse, his 3 followers close behind him. The crowd let them go, too ashamed of their own actions to pursue them. Within an hour, Reverend Thorne and his men had packed their belongings and left Dust Devil Gulch forever. The town watched them ride away in a cloud of dust, taking their fear and hatred with them. As the sun began to set, Elara and Jedediah prepared to leave as well. There was nothing left for either of them in this place. Too much damage had been done, too many trusts had been broken. They needed a fresh start somewhere new. Jedediah helped Elara onto his horse, then swung up behind her. As they rode slowly down the main street, some of the townspeople came out to watch them go. A few called out apologies or thanks, but most just stood in guilty silence. At the edge of town, Jedediah finally spoke again. "Where would you like to go?" he asked Elara softly. "Anywhere but here," she replied, and he nodded in understanding. They rode off toward the horizon together, leaving Dust Devil Gulch to heal from the wounds that fear and hatred had carved into its heart. The town would recover eventually, but it would never forget the lesson it had learned about the dangers of blind faith and mob justice. Sometimes the greatest courage doesn't come from loud voices or grand gestures. Sometimes it comes from quiet people who simply refuse to let injustice happen in front of them. Jedediah had shown the town that true strength doesn't need words, and that standing up for what's right doesn't require speeches or sermons. The story of the silent cowboy and the healer would be told in Dust Devil Gulch for generations to come, reminding people that heroes can come from the most unexpected places and that justice sometimes arrives on quiet feet, wearing dusty boots and carrying a gentle heart. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to hear more tales of courage and justice from the Old West. Leave a comment below and tell us about a time when someone stood up for you when you needed it most.